So our next step with setting up the conveyor scale is to do a tare length calibration. And that is found on the console here. We're going to the right to our calibrate menu. We hit enter and we go to tare length. And now all I have to do is enter to start. And so Andy's going to mark one rod with a piece of duct tape. That way we know where we start and where we end. He's going to plug the conveyor in and mark a place and say go. I hit enter at that point. The system will let the conveyor run around 3 times. It collects data about the weight of the empty belt when it's running for 3 whole revolutions, and it stores that information so that it knows what the zero weight of the empty conveyor actually is. And then it can automatically subtract that once we have weight running over it. So go ahead, Andy. Good, so we've started it. Now you see this count. That's the magnet every time it passes the sensor. It takes a long time. The shaft turns slow, and there's also a slight delay in how it displays that. I like putting more than 1 revolution in a tare length calibration because it means that when we do the tare calibration, we're averaging over more than just 1 revolution. In this particular case, the belt is actually fairly consistent in the way it looks. We don't have flights or up and down rods, so I'm imagining it's fairly consistent in its weight along its length, but I'll run it 3 revolutions here anyway just to show you how that works. If you have conveyors that run much faster and that have flights on them, I recommend that you run at least 3 revolutions, and 4 or 5 is not a bad idea, because we need to store the weight of that conveyor properly and be able to average it properly so we can subtract the weight of the conveyor from the weight that it's moving. So Andy gave me the signal, I hit escape. Now it asks me, do we want to save the new value? And I click enter for yes. And the belt calibration or tare length calibration is finished. So we can escape out of here and we can go right away to our tare calibration, which let me go back to run so I can show you where that is. Tare. And the conveyor is still running, so we can start that anytime. You don't have to be at a specific position to start a tare calibration. It's just that the conveyor needs to be running. And it will start, and the display will tell us how far along it is. So this will run to 100%, and then it will ask us whether we want to save the new value, and we click enter for yes. So now it's going to make another 3 full revolutions, and while it's doing that, it's storing the weight of the empty belt. Running a tare calibration is a really good thing to do. We recommend that you do that often, especially if your conditions change. So if you have this system installed at a storage where you're receiving potatoes and sometimes the potatoes are wet, sometimes they're dry, if conditions change like that, you want to redo a tare calibration because you can get a little bit of soil built up on the rods. That adds to the weight of the web, and you need to be able to remove that. When you go back to dry conditions, some of that dirt will disappear, and you need to redo a tare calibration to allow for that change. So it's something that typically people do once a day, but again, as I said, if conditions change, you want to do that more than once a day. There's one other point I could make about the tare calibration, is that sometimes these machines sit outside, very cold. Sometimes we don't have a belted chain or a hook chain belt like this, but we have a solid rubber belt. That can get pretty stiff when it's cold. And so I would recommend that you let it run for a few minutes before you do that tare calibration. It just helps to become a little bit more flexible, and it will transmit its empty weight to the load cells better and more accurately. And there, we're almost at 100%. Good, so it asked me save new data. I like the new data, so we're going to save it. Enter. new tare level saved. So now the next step, also very important, is to confirm that you actually have a good tare calibration. We're pretty sure we do, but you should check. And there is a check for that in the test menu. So we're going to the test menu. Hit enter, and the very first one on here is test tare. So we'll hit enter. And what we want to see now is that our accumulating weight, our load weight for example, here stays 0. The belt is empty, it's running, but it should stay 0 because there's nothing on it. We see a little bit of an up and down number here. This is our flow rate in pounds per second. And it's bumping up and down a little bit, sometimes a little negative, then a bit positive. It's a very low number. We don't see any weight accumulating, so it seems to balance out to 0. And if you run that for a minute or so, and we see no weight here, then we can assume that we have a good tare, and we could go on to the next steps of the calibration. And I would say that that's good. So on to the next calibration, which is called a span calibration.